So our next speaker is David Alexander from I can't remember the name.
That's quite right, I'll introduce myself.
Anonymised name of your organisation. MyDex, thank you, I got there in the end. And Personal Data Stores is your conversation.
Bless you. Right, well, fantastic morning, and in many respects makes my session easier to have a conversation with, because I was slightly troubled by the title, Engaging People in Data Privacy, because my opening slide is, I am not absolutely sure that privacy as a term isn't in fact part of the problem, and I think Kieran has demonstrated very ably that it's quite a complicated area, and often it confuses rather than clarifies things for people, and it's got connotations with negativity and breaches and misuse of information and publicity and all the terrible things that happen in life. And I actually think we end up in a perpetual dead end when we talk about privacy, unless it can be broken down. And one of the questions I put to Kieran over lunch is that I love that 7-layer, but it's in fact a 3-dimensional 7-cubic faceted model. How do you get human beings to engage in that? And I think there's a slightly different conversation from the work we do as a community interest company. And we've been around for 9 years, so we're still a startup and still doing exciting things, but we've seen a lot of things come and go. And there's a huge amount of activity to try and address issues of privacy, issues of consent, issues of data protection, whether it's GDPR or fantastic work around privacy by design, but where's it embedded? How's it being done? Has anyone heard of AML4? Does anyone here know what AML4 is? It's the anti-money laundering regulations that are kicking in via the FCA, and it's the 4th version. You can only imagine the lawyers are wrapping their hands with glee at the implementation costs for financial services. PSD2, anyone heard of that? Payment Services Directive 2, please provide an API to your bank account, let a trusted third party, quotes trusted, trustworthy, move money in and out of your bank account on your behalf because you gave them a token that said so. Slightly scary. Privacy Shield, this new relationship Europe has with the USA, and they're all organisation centric. They're all about paternalistic organisations discussing us, the poor people, the data subjects, about how they're going to move data and whether they have the right to move the data around about us. There's very little consistency. There's far too much effort for the organisations that have to process this stuff and for all of us as individuals, and there's very little offer of genuine participation beyond filling out endless forms again and again and duplicating effort. So I think there's a real problem. We're using old generation mental models for how information moves and how information flows. We've got people advising around compliance that are holding the digital economy back. Now, I specifically founded a company to try and help people become empowered and protect their lives and their identity and get things done in really simple terms. So you might find it slightly bizarre that I'm advocating that we need to make things easier, but I genuinely believe it's the case, because the underlying cause is this insane plate of spaghetti that you see before you. We call it the crown of thorns. This poor individual sitting in the middle with all these terribly paternalistic organisations sharing information about us backwards and forwards. The government today has got a digital economy bill and an investigatory powers bill that's giving them unbelievable rights to move data between different parts of government and into the private sector about us. The data about us is utterly fragmented. Again and again you keep coming. My own bank, because I rang the credit card department, told me my date of birth was wrong and I'd failed identity verification. It took me 4 weeks for them to write me an apology letter saying that somebody in data entry from the handwritten form when I opened the business credit card account had mistyped my date of birth. They wanted me to re-verify my identity and walk all the way back into a branch to verify something because they're incompetent, because everything's done as paper. So the world is mad. Sharing is entirely complicated. There's a lack of transparency. There's a man at the back working endlessly to try and get the NHS to completely declare what information they've got, who they've shared it with, and for what purpose. Data usage reports. You heard it here first. Please talk to Make Confidential. We're very supportive of that idea. There's a lack of genuine control. It's the tick box exercise, as you quite rightly identified. People are just ticking boxes. They don't really understand. There's an absolute lack of context about how this information is being used and why. And there's absolutely no chance of revocation without some endless cycle of sending letters or trying to unsubscribe. We have a little process called unsubscribe quarterly, and we go through all the email accounts that we control and we start unsubscribing for the stuff, and we're getting better because there's some nice little techniques in email addresses, particularly if you're using Gmail. You can add the plus sign after an email address when you register your normal email address plus 22, and it will come back and you can tell who's sharing your data really simply. So if you ever want to use that technique, very useful. There's a lack of standards about how information gets around. So each different sector's got an initiative or a program. And we see this endlessly coming through in the work that we do, where we're trying to help people, help information flow. So I think the real conversation is about engaging people. We talked about engaging people, real people, about the benefits of data sharing. And most people, when they think about it, and I've heard this repeatedly stated, most people assume the data is being shared anyway, but they also assume something else. They also assume a basic Hippocratic oath of do no harm. The assumption is, I do not mind my bank ringing me up and saying, Mr. Alexander, we've stopped a transaction in California because we don't think you're buying a Kalashnikov in a gun shop. Is that correct? Because you're normally in London. And I go, you're absolutely right, I very much appreciate it. And they say, we've stopped it. I don't mind them ringing me about that. Kieran's heard this story before. But when they ring me 2 days later and want to be a fundamental underpinning of my life and sell me life insurance and a mortgage and they don't know anything about me, I don't want that phone call because I never asked for it. So there's an implicit sense of consent that's about policy around my life. What do I expect is reasonable? I don't mind my GP ringing me and saying some abnormal results in your sort of quarterly diabetic check, we'd like you to come and see the doctor. But I don't want them ringing me up about something where they want me to go to some screening thing that's nothing to do with any conditions I've got because they've got a tick box exercise from NHS England. I think it's about people making more informed choices in the context of their lives. I'm sort of reiterating many of your points, I think, here. Setting preferences and policy is the area that I would really go to. And I think it's about giving people the ability to assess risk and the decision they're making. And we've looked at this over 9 years, thought about icons. There's some fantastic work being done around iconography for understanding risk and cognifying risk in different ways. People would ignore them. When we did a proof of concept and a community prototype some 5 years ago, we had lab testing, eyeball tracking. We did huge amounts of work to try and get people to engage with the notion of a data sharing agreement, and we upped their engagement level by 0.5 of a second with all of the design and human interface stuff imaginable. We've got a theory at the moment which we're looking to fund, which is that sound is a much more powerful indicator of risk. But unfortunately, we've also found out there's huge cultural variation. Sounds that make you wake up and think there's a problem in the UK are not the same as they are in China or Japan. So there isn't some universal principle that tells you something's risky. So we have to make it configurable. Now, I keep trying to think of an analogy that sort of says, well, where have we been before and this has happened before? And the best one I can come up with, and it's to do with my dear old mum who's 80, is that she has a laptop computer and she knows she's got a firewall. And she knows that it keeps her safe, and that's all she knows about it. Now, when firewalls first came out, if you've got sensible shoes like me, you sort of saw them in nice little command line edit, and you could tell it to stop ports on the network. If I've lost you already, I'm sure I have. But the idea was that they would protect you from incursion attacks from the outside world and stop things getting out of your computer. Nobody could sell them. And then one of the commercial vendors said, we've built this brilliant product, nobody's using it. And somebody said, do you know what we need to do? We need to make it install, simply make you safe and stick a big green tick on it. It's now installed and you're protected. And then it would deal with any exceptions that arose, and it would pop up with a little box and go, this software you've just installed is trying to access the internet. Do you want to do it? It's on our list of acceptable software. Yes. Press a button, it allowed it to access. Do you want to do it once, or do you want to allow it to do it all the time? And then they got a bit more sophisticated, and you could open the dashboard of your firewall, and you could go, I want to be really secure, which meant you couldn't access anything, or I want to be completely loose. and it would allow everything to work. And then they started allowing you to lock it down, so my 12-year-old had really secure with some kind of control over content that would come through. But they made it a consumer product, and they made it a product that immediately made you feel safe. And I think the whole issue around consent, the idea of managing data, moving data, letting people use your data has got to get to that level of simplicity that you can cognify it from a, I'm happy for this stuff to happen, to echo this gentleman's words here. And I think we all need the data to flow. Does anybody here enjoy filling out forms? Anyone? Anyone find it a fulfilling, emotionally exciting exercise? How many of you have had the experience when you've tried to access a new service and they ask you for the same information, and it's the same bank, by the way, or the same mobile phone company, and they want you to fill it all out again as part of their regulatory compliance program? How many people have said a rude word in their head or out loud, or as we buy my father a new keyboard every year for Christmas, just like the Giles annual he used to get, because he just gets annoyed when he has to do something really simple like reset his password on his goddamn TalkTalk account. All right, so anyway, we'll move on. So we all need the data to flow, but we need it to flow at the right time. We need it to be effortlessly moving around because we're too busy, aren't we? Life's incredibly busy. It's got to be in the right place at the right time, in the right format, and critically for the right purposes. And we can't have to engage at such a granular level for every single transaction. We shouldn't be expected to fill out forms, and we shouldn't be expected to have some complicated legal debate with a set of terms and conditions about ordering something that costs £4.50, and we have to read something longer than Declaration of Independence to be so appropriately informed, do we? So we need to turn it on its head. We need to have a general purpose set of legal agreements that allow us to share information, and all we have to focus on is the purpose and the context of what we're doing, and not read somebody's terms and conditions written by a lawyer whose job it was to trick us into saying yes. Sorry to be so negative about it. But ultimately, it's about reduction in friction, reduction in risk, and we really want to increase access. We spend a lot of our time working with people who are in those hard-to-reach groups, people that would not classify themselves as digital natives, public services, getting people out of poverty, applying for warm home discount, moving data around a local cluster, helping people travel more efficiently, saving money, saving time. They want access to services. They're the people that need them. They're the least able to fill out forms. They need the convenience of making it happen, and they're very happy to push a button on their phone or reply to a text they get, but they don't want to engage in the digital society in the way that some of us might imagine that they would. You know, they want to trust implicitly what they're using, and they want a warning if they're about to step outside the envelope of safety and security that's the minimum expectation they've got. And I really think it comes down to this idea that at the heart of it, they need to be able to accumulate the data about their lives from anywhere, whether it's self-asserted data that they happen to capture themselves. They need to be able to collect it and receive it and store it. They need verified data that comes from the government, their bank, their local authority, wherever it is, and they need to be able to hold on to it in a place that they're in control of, and they then need to be able to share it where and whenever they want to under some kind of system of control that's easy for them to understand. And whether that data is transactional data, bank transactions, itemized phone history, billing information, prescriptions that you've had, whatever it may be, or whether it's metadata, stuff about me or stuff about my house or stuff about my car, stuff about my account, stuff about the state of me as an individual, what's my blood pressure, the real-time blood pressure, not the historical stuff, what my bank balance is. They need to be able to accumulate this stuff without any effort. They haven't got to go and download it. You know, the current thing is download your bank statements in CSV format and then you can use them. Nobody's got time to do that. And why should they have to log into a portal? My wife is paying £1 extra to get paper statements. Why? Because she believes that it's not worth her effort logging into her bank to then download them to print them. She's from Yorkshire. The cost of a printer cartridge is very significant in her mind. And she thinks they can just bloody post them to me and it's cheaper than buying printer cartridges. And actually, anyway, I want to tick off every transaction as I put it into Sage. I did try the conversation about download it automatically and load it into Sage using the API. Go away, David, don't even talk to me, don't even know what an API is. So, you know, if that could all happen magically without her having to do anything, she would do it because she doesn't like wasting time. But ultimately, suddenly what we're doing is by getting the individual equipped to accumulate information and store it and receive regular updates, so they get updates from wherever their driving license, whatever it is, they become the center of the universe. They become the accumulator, they become the point of integration. That plate of spaghetti, crown of thorns, turns into a halo of trust because they connect to people that they want to connect to, they share information that they want to connect, and they are in control. And they don't have to sit there every single time. They can do exactly what Mr. Gomer was talking about, which is set some broad policy. And whatever your idea about a consent dashboard is, let's just say I'm happy for anyone to use my location data to keep me safe. I'm happy for anyone to have access to my critical medical information if I'm in an emergency. I'm a type 2 diabetic. I'm also somebody, if I get stung by a wasp, I'm in hospital. Like a Michelin man, please be aware. Fortunately, no wasps at the moment. I'm very used to the idea that I have to wear one of these. And people can look at it because it can save your life. But actually, I think how many people have got ice in their phone on the address book at the moment? Anyone? Yeah, so the assumption is you can get past the fingerprint and the code and get in and do ice, yeah? And we all do that because we want to be safe. So I'm talking about making this stuff flow at a digital level. And I think it's about being able to set broad policies at a high level that you do once, and in fact, you know what? Download, set it up, and have it default to a certain set of settings for somebody, and then let them adjust. I don't think it's about every time you need to log in somewhere that you have to sign up to a set of terms and conditions. The organisations you share data with are signing up to a basic set of conditions for you. So the key principles, I think, of this person-centred design approach is fundamentally it must empower individuals to make choices, informed choices with minimal effort necessary. It must ensure a secure two-way exchange of information. That information must be trusted by the person who receives it and the person who sends it, so that they know it's their version of the truth. And if, for example, DVLA are sharing your driving license status with you that you're holding, if you choose to stop sharing that with people, I would suggest that's a marker that your circumstances with your driving license may have changed. So it suddenly puts all of this information flow at a very low level. It captures and verifies once. You know, it's madness the amount of times you have to verify. I had 4 DBS checks. One because my wife runs a before and after school club that's regulated by Ofsted. Once because I'm a group scout leader. The third time because I happen to have been the chair of governors of a primary school. And the fourth time, I can't remember why I did it, but it was a project I was on in a pretty scary place. So individual controlling access, data is portable and independent, and that opens up the world for ideas and concepts, whether it's research projects, sharing data, but the trust must be transparently delivered. You should be able to look and know who's got your data, what they're using it for what purpose. And I think a person-centered approach makes the economy open, safe and secure. And that's really all I wanted to say. There is more in the slide deck about who we are and the implementation of these ideas we've had, but that was basically my concept. I really think it's time to put the person at the centre.
Thanks very much, Dave. That's really exciting. Okay, any questions? Okay, in the middle there.
My name's Magda Osman. I'm a decision scientist at Queen Mary University. So,
in Roehampton?
No.
Okay.
Mile End.
Okay.
Both quite unpleasant places. A lot of the sort of design issues that you were talking about, so you're saying, right, okay, well, you can sort of flash up lights or maybe sort of bells and whistles to make people sort of aware, seems to imply that there's if you just get the design right, then you're going to start engaging people and get them sort of much more motivated. If you're just making the thing itself salient, whatever that is, regarding them making more informed decisions about, you know, what data is being used and what they're consenting to and so on. But there also has to be a climate, socially, politically, for people to care. And along with, you know, the convenience for not, you know, things are stacked up. I mean, I get the sort of cynical point, which is things are stacked against us anyway, so it's just more convenient to just consent or whatever else and give away a lot of your data. But it's also, is there an appetite to actually change perception, independent of design? So there's psychological issues around this, or social issues and so on, which are much bigger than just having a catchy design.
I think it's a really good observation. The thing I would say is the context is king here. We do work across public, private and third sector, and if anyone has ever seen the Finding Nemo movie and there's a bunch of seagulls sitting there going, mine, 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 that's the private sector. The private sector is constantly going, it's my data. And some of their legal people are going, no, it's not your data. If anything, it's co-created with the customer, the person you're serving, and they've got a right to access it, and GDPR is going to make that possible. So I think GDPR and the data protection regulation that will come into the UK is driving a new narrative. But this is a generational shift. If you can't show specific benefit to the organisation that has that data and why they should give it to you, you will not succeed. Where we've seen the most success is what we call clusters. And there's a big movement now which is talking about cities, not countries, clusters, not, you know, it's about clusters and communities. And where you're trying to cut down the delivery cost of public service but improve outcomes, anything that can do that with the existing resources and make people's lives better gets quite a lot of attention and interest. The information governance, IT brigade sort of get petrified about boundaries and domains and all of those sort of things. But you can work through it, and we're getting some very successful cluster-based projects there. But you're absolutely right. If the data doesn't flow in both directions, there's a fundamental problem. And when we go and see a private sector organisation, typically a bank, they will go, we don't care about sharing data outside of the bank, but I've got a big problem. I've got a retail banking arm, I've got a mortgage, a life insurance, and I've got those. And I can't move the data without the person giving me consent. And we can't design a consent journey that makes any sense. We've come up with a model that simply allows them to give the data back to the individual, put it in a personal data store, and when they go to the other site, it says, have you got one of these? Yeah, oh, I'll happily share it. Because they're not getting suspicious. They know that they're in, it's a psychological control mechanism that allowed them to do it. But getting the data to flow is fundamental. The government has been phenomenally inept in this particular area. When they came out with a program years ago called My Data, has anyone ever heard of that? And they launched it to a fanfare of consumer empowerment, helping people, improving decisions, improving choices, that wonderful phrase. And when they launched it, they brought all the private sector in, kept the government out completely, bizarrely, private sector only. And they brought them all in. I was at the kick-off meeting and they said, the really important thing here is that all of you will hand back the data you have about your customers to the customers, tariffs, billing history, all the customer information, and they will then be empowered to leave you. And literally they said that on the stage, and you could hear Justin King from Sainsbury's literally go, it's not happening. And he walked into number 10 and said, we won't take part. Right? So suddenly you lost the retailers, the mobile phone companies thought it was a brilliant opportunity to sell data, the banks came in and said it's very complicated, FCA regulations, etc. So yes, getting data to flow is fundamental, but at the moment most of us are not equipped to accumulate data and share it. So we're trying to fix that kind of one cluster at a time, working with one organisation where there's a benefit, and there's a lot of false dawns. I call it a generational shift, and MIDEX has to be funded for what's called an infinite patient strategy, where we're there as a community interest company trying to help people through that transition. But it is a generational shift.
I think you've partly answered the question I was going to ask already, but I'll try to phrase it slightly differently. It's Gillian Rabb from the University of Edinburgh. You showed at your last picture this nice star with a person in the middle. Yeah. Your first picture was this big hairnet going round about her. Yeah. Now the fact that this person has a star doesn't actually get rid of the hairnet. And what I was going to ask you, which I think you've partially answered, was how you enforce the hairnet to communicate with it. And in a way, what I was thinking as you were talking was that this really has to be done by regulation of some sort. But that was my take on it. I know you've partly answered this already.
Well, I think there are two things that happen. The regulation is in some respects driving accessibility to the information. But what most organisations crave in the dealings with and the acquiring of new customers and the starting of new transactions is verified data. When they get you to fill in one of those forms online, they have to take the data you give them, and then they have to do a back office process called verification, whether it's your identity, they use third-party service providers, or they've got some kind of risk-based assessment process. If what they can get off you is a cryptographically signed piece of data that says this came from DVLA, you have a driving license and these are your points, or you're entitled to this benefit, which automatically qualifies you for the warm home discount, they don't have to do the back office processing. They can immediately move to a digital end-to-end transaction and cut the cost. So there is a motivation to get access to information, but the government is trying to make data flow inside government. Private sector is lobbying government for access to public sector personally held information, because they'll say we can make our businesses more efficient and generate more tax revenue for the UK, and we can make our customers' life easier. But it's still the crown of thorns. The individual's still sitting outside. So I think it is a mixture of regulation and finding the win-win for the customer and for the brand or organisation concerned.
Okay, thank you very much to Richard and David. Some very interesting stuff. Okay, quick tea and coffee break, 15 minutes, back in.